If Joel Osteen's church keeps losing members at the rate it's losing them right now, Lakewood will be half empty by the end of next year and financially dead by 2028. These aren't opinions. This is what the numbers say. And by the end of this video, you'll see exactly how the math breaks down, year by year, until one of America's most famous megachurches can no longer keep the lights on. But here's the thing. This isn't speculation. We have the data. We have the trajectory. And we have 2 case studies of megachurch empires that followed this exact same curve before collapsing completely. So let's walk through what happens when a prosperity gospel empire starts bleeding out. Lakewood Church once claimed 50,000 weekly attendees. That number made it the largest church in America. It was the crown jewel of the prosperity gospel movement. The building itself, the former Compaq Center, where the Houston Rockets used to play, became a symbol of what God supposedly does for those who believe big enough. Today, independent estimates put actual weekly attendance closer to 30,000. That's a loss of 20,000 people, not over a decade, over just a few years, and the bleeding hasn't stopped. The decline accelerated after the Hurricane Harvey controversy, when Lakewood initially kept its doors closed while smaller churches and mosques opened theirs to flood victims. It accelerated again during the pandemic, when the church went virtual and many members never came back. And it continues now as younger generations increasingly reject the prosperity gospel message that made Joel Osteen famous. Now, Lakewood operates on a reported annual budget of around $90 million. That money comes almost entirely from tithes and donations. No members, no money. It's that simple. And when you're running a 16,000-seat arena, paying hundreds of staff members, maintaining broadcast operations across multiple platforms, and funding the lifestyle that prosperity preachers are known for, you need every single one of those seats filled. The margins aren't as wide as people think. One bad year can turn surplus into deficit. 2 bad years can turn deficit into crisis. So what happens when you project the current decline forward? Let's do the math. If Lakewood continues losing members at its current documented rate, by the end of 2025, weekly attendance will drop below 25,000. That's half of what it was at its peak. The arena will look emptier. The energy will feel different. The cameras will have to work harder to make it look full. By 2026, you're looking at 20,000 or less. That's when the tithe revenue drops below what's needed to maintain operations at current levels. And by 2027, the church hits what analysts call critical mass. That's the point where fixed operational costs exceed incoming tithes. The point where the church literally cannot pay its bills without selling assets or taking on debt. Now, megachurches don't announce when they hit critical mass. They don't send out press releases saying the money's running out. Instead, they do what every failing organization does. They cut staff quietly. They defer maintenance on the building. They scale back programming and outreach. They cancel mission trips and youth initiatives, and they hope nobody notices. But the trajectory doesn't change. It just buys time. It delays the inevitable by months, maybe a year. But the math always catches up. And we've seen this exact pattern before. Twice. Let's talk about the Crystal Cathedral. For decades, it was one of the most famous churches in America. Robert Schuller built an empire on positive thinking and television ministry. His Hour of Power broadcast reached millions every Sunday. Sound familiar? At its peak, the Crystal Cathedral had a congregation of over 10,000, a weekly television broadcast reaching millions around the world, and a sprawling campus worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The building itself was an architectural landmark, designed by Philip Johnson, with over 10,000 windows. It was supposed to be eternal, a monument to possibility thinking that would outlast its founder. And then, the decline started. It took exactly 5 years from the first visible signs of trouble to total bankruptcy. 5 years, that's all. In 2006, attendance started dropping as Robert Schuller aged and the message started feeling dated. Donations followed the attendance down. By 2008, the church was running deficits in the millions. They started laying off staff. They canceled programs. They made public appeals for emergency donations. By 2010, they were selling off assets just to make payroll. The famous crystal windows needed repairs they couldn't afford. The campus started looking neglected. And in 2012, the Crystal Cathedral filed for bankruptcy and sold the entire campus to the Catholic Diocese of Orange for $57 million, a fraction of what it cost to build. Robert Schuller's family was pushed out in a series of bitter public disputes. The ministry dissolved completely, and the building that was supposed to stand as a monument to God's blessing became someone else's cathedral. The timeline matters here, because Lakewood is currently somewhere around year 2 or 3 of that same 5-year curve. The attendance decline has started. The cultural relevance is fading. The founder is aging, and there's no succession plan in place. But the Crystal Cathedral isn't the only precedent. Let's talk about Heritage USA. Jim Balker built one of the largest Christian theme parks and ministry complexes in America. At its height, Heritage USA attracted 6 million visitors a year. 6 million. It was the 3rd most visited theme park in America, behind only Disney World and Disneyland. The PTL television network reached millions of homes. The money was flowing in faster than they could count it. They built hotels, they built water parks, they built shopping centers. The growth seemed infinite, just like the prosperity gospel promised, until it wasn't. The collapse of Heritage USA followed the same pattern we saw at the Crystal Cathedral and the same pattern we're seeing at Lakewood. Attendance started declining when the novelty wore off and scandals started surfacing. Donations dropped as people lost faith in the leadership. Fixed costs stayed exactly the same because you can't unbuild a theme park. And when the gap between income and expenses got too wide, the whole thing imploded. Bakker went to prison for fraud. The ministry dissolved overnight, and Heritage USA became a ghost town, literally abandoned and left to rot. Today, you can find urban exploration videos of people walking through the ruins of what was supposed to be God's theme park. The water slides are covered in graffiti. The hotels are crumbling. The parking lots are empty. The prosperity gospel promised unlimited growth. These empires got unlimited collapse instead. Now, some people will say Joel Osteen is different. He's too big to fail. He's got the television deals with networks around the world. He's got the book sales, millions of copies with titles like Your Best Life Now. He's got the brand recognition that transcends Christianity itself. And that's true. Joel Osteen has diversified his income in ways that Robert Schuller and Jim Bakker never managed to. But here's what people miss. The church is still the engine. Without Lakewood, there's no platform. Without the congregation, there's no television broadcast worth watching. Without the weekly services, there's no content to package and sell. And without the tithe revenue, there's no way to maintain the operation that makes everything else possible. Joel Osteen's personal wealth is separate from Lakewood's finances. He famously doesn't take a salary from the church. But the church still has to pay for the arena lease and operations. The church still has to pay for the hundreds of staff members. The church still has to pay for the broadcast infrastructure and satellite time. And if the church can't pay those bills, the whole operation shuts down. Joel keeps his personal wealth, but he loses the platform that made that wealth possible in the first place. And then there's the succession problem. Every megachurch empire faces the same question eventually. Who takes over when the founder steps back? For Lakewood, that question has already been answered, and the answer is nobody. Joel Osteen's son, Jonathan, was the obvious heir. He grew up in the church. He preached occasionally from the same stage his father made famous. He had the name recognition and the family connection. Everything was set up for a smooth transition. But Jonathan has made it clear, publicly and repeatedly, that he's not interested in taking over Lakewood. He's pursuing music and his own creative projects. He's building his own path. And without a successor waiting in the wings, Lakewood has no future beyond Joel Osteen himself. The church is the Joel Osteen show. It always has been. When Joel stops performing, the show ends. There's no transition plan being implemented. There's no next generation of leadership being groomed for the spotlight. There's just Joel, week after week smiling that famous smile until he can't do it anymore. So what are the possible scenarios here? Let's lay them out honestly. Scenario 1 is the slow bleed. Lakewood continues losing members at its current rate. Revenue declines year over year. Costs get cut where they can be cut. Programming shrinks. Staff gets reduced. The church becomes a shadow of what it was at its peak, but it technically survives in some diminished form. This is the 2028 timeline. By that point, Lakewood would be operating at maybe 40% of its peak capacity, running persistent deficits, and making increasingly desperate appeals for special donations. It's not dead, but it's clearly dying, and everyone watching can see it. Scenario 2 is the sudden collapse. A scandal breaks. Something massive. Something that makes the Hurricane Harvey criticism look minor. Something that causes mass exodus overnight and kills the brand completely. We've seen this happen before with other ministries. One revelation, one viral moment, one hidden truth exposed, and the whole thing implodes in months instead of years. Lakewood is one bad headline away from this scenario at all times. Every megachurch is. Scenario 3 is the pivot. Joel Osteen sees the writing on the wall and downsizes voluntarily before circumstances force his hand. Moves out of the arena into a smaller, more sustainable facility. Scales back to an operation that matches actual attendance instead of peak attendance. Focuses energy on television, publishing, and digital ministry. Essentially transforms from a megachurch into a media ministry with a church attached. This is arguably the smart play financially, but it requires admitting that the growth phase is over, and nothing about Joel Osteen's ministry suggests he's capable of making that admission. The prosperity gospel is built on the promise that God wants you to have more. More money, more success, more growth, always more. Admitting decline means admitting the theology was wrong. The whole message collapses when the messenger has to downsize. And Joel Osteen has spent his entire career telling people that faith produces increase, that God rewards belief with abundance, that your best life is always ahead of you. How do you voluntarily shrink when your whole message is that God doesn't want anyone to shrink? You don't. You keep promising the blessing is coming. You keep telling the congregation that breakthrough is around the corner. You keep preaching prosperity and increase and abundance right up until the day the doors close for good. That's what Robert Schuller did at the Crystal Cathedral. That's what Jim Bakker did at Heritage USA. They preached possibility and increase while their empires crumbled around them. And if the numbers are right, that's exactly what Joel Osteen will do too. The data points in one direction. 20,000 members lost and counting. Attendance declining every year. No successor willing to take over. A $90 million annual operation that depends entirely on one aging man's ability to fill 16,000 seats every single week. The math doesn't lie. The math never lies. Lakewood Church will look very different by 2027. And by 2028, we'll know for certain whether America's most famous prosperity preacher can somehow defy the same gravity that pulled down every megachurch empire that came before him. History suggests, he can't. The numbers confirm it. The prosperity gospel promised unlimited growth. The documented evidence promises something else entirely. If you've been following this series, you know this isn't about attacking anyone's faith. It's about documenting the gap between what's promised from that stage and what the evidence actually shows. Subscribe if you want to see how this story ends, because one way or another, it's ending soon.